The Queen Consort was reorganising inheritance items behind closed doors. Items that were never meant to be touched, marked with names that weren't hers, hidden behind steel, buried from every registry. But when a royal guard was pulled into that room, forced through a door he wasn't supposed to see, he realised what it really was. Not a tribute, not a replica collection. It was Queen Elizabeth's true inheritance, the pieces meant for William, for Charlotte, for George. And when he tried to leave, they locked him inside, because what he'd seen could tear the crown apart. So before we show you exactly what unfolded inside that sealed vault at Windsor Castle, hit subscribe with the bell icon turned on and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because this story didn't end in headlines. It ended behind a locked door and a guard who chose loyalty over silence. Windsor Castle was never truly silent, even at night. The creak of aged floorboards, the distant clatter of ceremonial boots on stone, wind brushing against stained glass windows that had stood for centuries. They all carried weight, the kind you feel in your chest before you understand why. But tonight, as Sergeant Alastair Rennick made his final rounds along the south wing, the silence felt different. Not solemn, not reverent, just wrong. Rennick had 2 tours in Helmond behind him and 8 years of ceremonial service at Windsor. He'd learned to trust that feeling, the one that whispered warnings before the facts caught up. He adjusted the leather strap on his utility belt and scanned the corridor's long stretch of antique portraits and brass sconces, their glow reflecting off polished marble like candlelight on water. That's when they appeared. 2 aides, both from the Queen Consort's personal office, faces tense, voices low. "You there?" The taller one spoke sharply, not waiting for acknowledgement. "You're needed in the Duchess room, immediately." Rennick blinked. "Ma'am's office?" "Urgent household business." The second aide, shorter, more nervous, added quickly, "It's not a question, Sergeant." No formal dispatch, no communication through official radio, no superior officer to verify the directive. Just 2 palace aides with clipped voices and twitchy body language, and the kind of veiled urgency that didn't sit right. Rennick hesitated. "I wasn't scheduled for interior detail tonight." "Schedules change," the first aide said curtly. "The Queen Consort needs eyes on hand, that's all. That's all." The phrase rattled in his head. No mention of ceremony, no mention of guard protocol. Just vague, improvised language, the kind that tries to sound official but leaves everything conveniently undefined. Still, he was in uniform, and unless he had a clear counter-order, refusal would mean dereliction. He gave a tight nod and followed them down the corridor, past carved arches leading toward the west wing, the private family quarters. The lighting dimmed with each turn. Polished marble gave way to older parquet flooring, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. At one point, he noticed a motion detector above the arch had been turned off, not flickering, deactivated. That's when it clicked. This wasn't routine, this wasn't security, this was cover. He stopped short. "What's the actual situation here?" The taller aide turned just enough to glance back. "Don't think, Sergeant. Just follow." And Rennick knew. He wasn't being briefed. He was being manoeuvred. Whatever waited behind that door in Camilla's private office, it wasn't meant for public eyes, not even the eyes of a guard. But by the time that thought settled, the aides had already opened the door, and one of them gave him the slightest push forward, just enough to cross the threshold, just enough to force him in. The moment Sergeant Rennick stepped into Camilla's private office, it felt like walking into the tail end of something no one was supposed to see. The air was thick with aged wood polish, fresh flowers, and something more sterile, the chemical tang of preservation spray. Chandeliers hung low above an imperial desk that had been transformed into a sorting station. Velvet cases lay open like autopsy trays. Jewellery glinted beneath harsh desk lamps. And across the far wall, 3 mahogany trunks stood ajar, their silk linings half filled. Camilla was there, draped in a silken robe the colour of wilted magnolias. She stood with her back partially turned, speaking briskly to a woman in a charcoal suit, her legal attaché most likely. Another aide hovered near a garment rack, rolling out hangers draped in ceremonial sashes and brooch loops. None of them expected him, at least not like this. Camilla glanced up. Her gaze didn't flicker with surprise, only irritation. "You," she said flatly, "you'll stand by the door." Quietly. No rank. No title. Just an order, clipped like a closing purse. "Yes, ma'am." But his eyes were already moving, tracing every detail, every object that didn't belong where it was. On a side table sat a ledger, bound in navy leather with a silver clasp. Its pages were open, and from the angle he stood, he could just make out the heading, Estate Reserve, QEII, Private. He stepped closer. "Stand still," Camilla snapped. "You're not here to browse." Rennick froze mid-step. "Apologies, ma'am." But his eyes kept scanning. He noticed something else now, a clipboard resting beside the ledger, a checklist, handwritten entries, some crossed out, others circled. One line read, "Emerald set, recast for modern setting." Another, "Rose diadem, photo shoot priority." Recast photo shoot. They weren't just borrowing these pieces, they were planning to alter them permanently. "You're still staring," Camilla said without looking up. "I told you, discretion means silence. It also means stillness." Rennick's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His eyes drifted to the attaché, who was now pulling fabric swatches from a leather portfolio, holding them up against a sapphire brooch as if choosing curtains. "The blue works," the attaché murmured, "but we'd need to remove the original clasp. It's too dated." "Agreed," Camilla replied. "Mark it for modification." Modification. Rennick felt his pulse in his temples now. These weren't replicas being commissioned. These were the originals, being stripped, reshaped, modernized. Elizabeth's signature pieces, dismantled for a press strategy. The items in the velvet trays weren't crown property. These weren't part of the Royal Collection's display archives. These were personal, unmistakably so. One brooch had the distinctive floral setting Queen Elizabeth had worn during her 1957 televised address. Another piece, a miniature signet, bore the Windsor family arms, etched so delicately it was barely visible unless you knew what to look for. These weren't ceremonial accessories. These were inheritance items, and someone was reassigning them. Camilla returned to the desk. Her attaché passed her a folder, unlabelled, slim. She opened it with one hand, while the other slid a pearl-handled magnifying glass across the stones in a necklace. "Too garish," she murmured. "Set it aside." "Ma'am," the aide whispered, glancing toward Rennick, "perhaps he should wait outside." "No," Camilla said sharply. "Let him see what discretion looks like." She turned to Rennick, her voice honeyed with contempt. "This process is entirely internal. What you see here, you do not report. You do not repeat. You do not think about. You were brought in to stand, so stand. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a muzzle." And yet Rennick could feel something uncoiling in his gut, the same tension he felt outside a compound gate in Helmand just before an IED detonated. Because something was being detonated here too, not with explosives, but with arrogance, silk gloves, and a quiet hand in someone else's legacy. Just behind him, one of the aides began inching toward a smaller door, low-ceilinged, iron latch. Rennick had seen doors like that before. They didn't lead out. They led down. The aide reached for the latch, and Rennick shifted. "What's below?" The nearest aide gave a tight smile. "Storage." "I wasn't told." Before the sentence finished, the taller aide behind him shoved hard between his shoulder blades. The force caught him off guard. His boot slid on the worn stone step and gravity did the rest. He stumbled down the first 5 steps, caught himself on a wooden handrail, and twisted around just in time to hear the latch slam shut behind him. A bolt slid into place. Silence. He stood still for a moment, letting the air settle. It was cool and stale, dry parchment and old cedar, but beneath that, something else. Velvet, gold-threaded fabric, wax seals. And then his eyes adjusted. The cellar was narrow but deep, lined with trunks stacked too high, all of them uniform in shape, and marked not with military or museum seals, but with monograms. E.R. Elizabeth Regina. Handwritten tags dangled from satin strings like museum exhibit labels. They were precise, scripted in the Queen's hand or that of her personal archivist. Each item was numbered and identified, not for public consumption, but for private succession. One case was labelled Sword Scabbard, Coronation Day, reserved George of Wales. Another, Diadem, Rose Diamond Cluster, reserved Princess Charlotte. He crouched and lifted a velvet lid, revealing a brooch that shimmered like morning frost. The card beneath it read, Personal gift to Elizabeth II from George VI, not to be separated. His hands clenched. He moved to the next trunk. Inside lay a christening gown, folded with museum-grade precision, its lace yellowed with age but still intact. The tag read, Worn by Elizabeth II, Charles III, William V, reserved, George of Wales, christening 2030, projected. Someone had already projected the year, already planned the moment, and someone else was preparing to erase it. In the third case, he found a leather-bound journal, small, unassuming, but marked with Elizabeth's personal seal. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The tag said enough. Private correspondence. Windsor family only. Not for public archive. Asterisk. Beside it sat a pair of pearl earrings in a silk-lined box, their surface worn smooth from decades of wear. The inscription inside the lid read, For my granddaughter, when she becomes a woman. E.R. asterisk. Rennick's throat tightened. These weren't just heirlooms, they were breadcrumbs. A trail Elizabeth had left, so her bloodline would never lose its way, so they'd know where they came from, who they were, and what they carried forward. And Camilla had been erasing that trail, piece by piece, and this wasn't memorabilia, this was bloodline. This was the inheritance chain Elizabeth herself had defined. Not crown property, not symbolic hand-me-downs. These were never meant to be worn by Camilla, never to be photographed for press releases, never to be handed off to any consort for optics. This was sacred continuity. And Camilla was stealing it in silence, item by item, generation by generation. He turned sharply, scanning the far end of the cellar. A set of garment bags hung from a portable rail. He stepped closer. On one bag, embroidered in gold thread, reserved, Charlotte, E.R. Estate instruction number, 214-point asterisk. Another tag had already been ripped off, the thread still dangling loose. It hit him like a punch to the sternum. They weren't just planning to steal these, they had already started. Rennick reached for his belt and unclipped the small flat security clasp sewn behind the leather, a holdover from Palace Guard protocol, rarely used. He pressed the recessed button twice. Silent alarm, no sirens, no red lights. But somewhere deeper in the castle, someone would know a guard had just triggered an unauthorized interference flag. He turned back to the cellar door, breathing hard. They'd forced him into this room, thinking he'd stay quiet. But they'd made a mistake. They'd locked the wrong man in with the truth. The first strike against the cellar door rattled the frame. Dust fell from the beam overhead, but the latch held. Rennick stepped back, breathing steady now, stance wide. Second strike, he dropped his shoulder into it, full force. This time the bolt groaned against the wood. It wasn't designed to withstand a soldier with a mission. He adjusted his angle. Third hit, the latch splintered. The door cracked open with a sharp snap and swung wide into the corridor, slamming against the stone wall. Voices shouted from up the hall, panicked, rapid. A tray clattered to the floor somewhere. Glass shattered. But Rennick wasn't stopping. He marched up the steps 2 at a time and pushed through the threshold into Camilla's office like a thunderclap. The aides jumped back with startled gasps. One of them dropped the ledger. The entire room spun toward him. Camilla mid-sentence. The legal attaché frozen mid-reach, her hand hovering over a velvet box. "What do you think you're doing?" Camilla barked, her voice razor-sharp. Rennick didn't hesitate. No more pretending. His boots echoed hard against the floor as he strode toward the desk, pointing directly at the velvet trays and open trunks. These were meant for her children. And her children's children. And you're stripping them bare. Camilla's nostrils flared. "You've signed your own dismissal, Sergeant." "No, ma'am," Rennick said evenly. "You've signed your own exposure." Alarms began to sound, quiet, pulsing tones echoing faintly through the walls. The silent trigger had reached the security substation. Outside, distant footsteps signalled movement. Inside, no one moved. Camilla stepped forward, face taut, her voice low and dangerous. "You were brought in to stand watch, not to make judgments." "And you brought me in," Rennick replied, "because you thought a guard would stand still. You thought I'd turn my back. But I took an oath, not to the throne, not to titles, to the crown." He pointed again, this time at a sealed black folder sitting beside the regalia. "And that crown left instructions. Clear one." The legal attaché spoke up, but his voice wavered. "Sergeant, I strongly advise you to leave this room." "You'd better advise her," Rennick cut in, "because she's about to answer for every single item in those trunks." Camilla narrowed her eyes, venom creeping into her voice. "These are legacy pieces. The public wants reassurance, familiarity. I'm doing what the monarchy has always done, adapting." Rennick stepped closer, jaw tight. "You're not adapting a tradition. You're gutting it." A louder chime now echoed from outside. Not an alarm, but the distinct clang of secured corridor locks disengaging. Someone was overriding interior access protocols. The aides looked around nervously. Camilla straightened. "You've brought disruption into a private room. You'll be stripped of your uniform by morning." Rennick didn't even blink. "Not before we find out how much you've already stolen." The office door began to rattle. Then it opened with a sharp, commanding slam, and everything inside the room changed. The footsteps hit the marble with the precision of a parade inspection, fast, even, unapologetic. No one in the room moved, but every head turned toward the sound. Rennick stood firm, the aides went rigid, and Camilla flinched. Princess Anne didn't pause, she didn't knock, she didn't wait for introductions. She stormed into the room like she had every right to be there, because she did. Her coat still half-buttoned, jaw clenched, hair wind-swept from motion, and fire behind her eyes that would have stopped a regiment in its tracks. "What in God's name have you done?" she demanded. Her voice cracked across the room like a whip. The aides stepped back immediately. Anne's eyes scanned the scene in one wide sweep. The scattered heirlooms, the velvet trays, the open trunks, the ledger in Rennick's hand, Camilla standing stiff like a child caught mid-theft. She didn't need context. She saw everything. Camilla lifted her chin with brittle elegance. "Anne, don't." Anne's voice was low now, but even more dangerous. "Do not speak first." The silence that followed was a vacuum. Anne walked past Rennick without acknowledgement, not because she ignored him, but because she already trusted he'd done what had to be done. Her attention was locked solely on Camilla. She stopped at the desk, eyes narrowing at the items in view. She pointed to a diamond-studded brooch resting atop a folded silk pouch. "That was meant for Charlotte," she said coldly. Camilla didn't flinch. Anne's hand hovered over a ceremonial pendant marked with an old linen tag. "E.R. Estate Reserve. Not for public presentation." "That was my mother's," Anne said, "and it was marked never to leave sovereign custody." "I'm not displaying them," Camilla said. "I haven't taken them from the building. I haven't worn them in public." Anne turned slowly. "Yet?" she said. "You haven't worn them yet?" The tension in the room snapped like a stretched wire. Camilla's legal attaché attempted diplomacy. "There's precedent for symbolic alignment." "Don't insult us both," Anne hissed. "This isn't symbolism. This is theft. And you," she said, turning again to Camilla, "you had the nerve to reassign George's inheritance, his sword, Charlotte's diadem, William's legacy, all of it." Camilla's voice sharpened. "You think they'll care in 30 years? You think the public will remember what was meant for who? They care about continuity." "No," Anne said, stepping forward, teeth bared now. "They care that what was hers stays sacred." Rennick didn't speak. He didn't have to. He stood like a soldier, carved from stone, the ledger still gripped in his hand, the sealed inheritance behind him. Camilla's face twisted. "You guards were made to stand still, not to think. Your oath is obedience." Rennick's voice was calm, My oath was to the crown. And she was the crown. The room was now volcanic, heat without motion, pressure without release. And Anne, still trembling, still burning, took one last breath. Then she reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a single folder. She flipped it open with precision, but her hands weren't steady. Not from fear, from fury restrained only by protocol. She pulled a single page from the sleeve, aged, yellowing at the edges. The kind of document preserved in temperature-controlled archives, not palace offices. She held it up, fingers tight around the corners, and read aloud. Inheritance items designated as private reserve shall remain untouched. Not to be repurposed, not to be displayed, not to be reassigned or worn. Sovereign custody only. Elizabeth R. Her mother's signature was there, black ink, sharp and precise, unchanged from the woman who had signed treaties, declarations, and coronation orders. Anne's voice dropped into a growl. She signed this the year after Charles married you. After you were brought into the household, she knew exactly what you'd try. Camilla stood still, lips parted but silent. The aides dared not breathe. Anne didn't stop. She left that sword for George, her great-grandson. She left the emerald set for Charlotte, and the rose diadem, her father gave that to her before the coronation. It was meant for William's wife one day. She stepped closer. And you would pull it all from the vault like dressing for a costume party, like it's yours to wear, yours to distribute. Camilla finally spoke. Her voice was low, tight. The people need to feel continuity. They need something familiar. I was told. By whom? Anne snapped. Which of your paid flatterers said, let's rob the Queen's grandchildren of what was promised to them? Camilla didn't answer. Anne reached for the ledger, still in Rennick's hand. He passed it to her without a word. She flipped it open, scanning the entries with barely restrained fury. Item 47, she read aloud, diamond diadem, assigned to William's line. She looked up. Crossed out, reassigned to consort heritage display. Her voice dripped with contempt on those last 3 words. She turned the page. Item 53, state emerald set, reserved for Charlotte. Another pause. Reclassified as modern continuity symbol. Anne's knuckles whitened around the ledger's spine. You even gave it a title. Like you were curating a museum exhibition. She slammed the book shut and tossed it onto the desk. You weren't building continuity, Anne said, her voice shaking now. You were erasing it. Anne's tone sharpened to a blade. You weren't promised anything. Silence. You were accepted. Barely. And still, she gave you space, she gave you dignity, and you repay her by gutting her will like it's just another draft. Rennick shifted slightly. His grip on the ledger had loosened just enough to feel his pulse in the paper. But he didn't move. He wanted every word to land. Camilla's lips tightened. They would never have known. Anne turned sharply. They didn't need to know. I needed to know. He needed to know. She gestured to Rennick. Every guard who took the oath to her, every child who watched her wave from that balcony for 70 years, they needed to know that what she left behind wouldn't be touched, wouldn't be repurposed. Camilla looked away. Anne stared her down, voice breaking with fury now. She didn't write those instructions for herself. She wrote them for her bloodline, for the crown she carried, for the names that follow. She folded the paper and set it down, not gently. Then, looking to Rennick, her command was clear and final. Seal everything. Every last piece. Now. Rennick moved with the precision of a man trained to dismantle bombs. One mistake, one hesitation, and it could all detonate. He knelt beside the trunks and opened his satchel, retrieving the royal custody chain, a coiled strand of blackened steel links with a numbered brass seal affixed to the end. A symbol not just of restriction, but of sanctity. Items bound under it were marked as untouchable unless unsealed by sovereign order. One by one, he began fastening the trunks shut, loop by loop. The first chain threaded through the brass eyelets with a series of soft metallic clicks. He tested the tension, firm, unbreakable. Then came the biometric seal, pressed against the locking mechanism until it beeped once and turned red. Secured. As he moved to the second trunk, he caught Camilla's reflection in the polished wood of the desk. She was watching him now, arms folded tight across her chest, her expression unreadable. Not anger, not shame, just calculation, like she was already planning her next move. He secured the second chain, another seal, another red light. The third trunk was heavier, the one containing the christening gown and the journal. He handled it with extra care, making sure the chain didn't scratch the wood. As the final seal clicked into place, he pulled his tablet from his belt and scanned each trunk's custody tag. One green light, then another, then a third. Heritage class. I transfer, initiated. Custody, Windsor Vault. Escort, Sergeant Alastair Rennick. He looked up. Anne was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe, or relief, or just the exhaustion of someone who'd spent her entire life protecting something most people didn't even know existed. Anne didn't move. She stood like a pillar between Camilla and the door, arms crossed, the last page from Elizabeth's directive still clutched in her hand. Her jaw was tight, but her voice, when it came, was icy calm. "You're not just robbing vaults," she said. "You're robbing her bloodline." Camilla remained still, gaze low, hands clenched in front of her. But something flickered behind her eyes. Not guilt. Calculation. Anne caught it. "That diadem was never for you," she continued, stepping toward the trunks now sealed with the crown's chain. "The emeralds were never for your shoulders. That sword, she chose that for George, before he could even walk." Camilla murmured, "You think they'd care about jewels when they're older? You think children need locked boxes of heirlooms when they'll inherit palaces?" "No," Anne said firmly. "I think they need to know what was meant for them. And I think they need to know it wasn't stolen before they were old enough to wear it." Camilla looked up, voice flat. "The people would never have known." Anne's face darkened. "The people don't need to know." "I do. He does." She nodded toward Rennick. "And when they grow up, when William passes it to Charlotte, and Charlotte passes it to George's child, they'll know." She stepped back to the centre of the room, arms folded behind her, like she was standing at attention. "This isn't about fashion, or symbolism, or headlines. This is about a chain that was drawn before either of us were born, one that starts with a signature, ends with a name, and doesn't include yours." The final seal clicked shut beneath Rennick's hand. A digital tag blinked green on his custody tablet. Heritage class, I transfer, initiated. Custody, Windsor Vault. Escort, Sergeant A. Rennick. Anne turned to him. "Confirm chain integrity." Rennick stood. "Verified, ma'am." "Triple lock. Sensor tags active. Chain number 213A. Camilla opened her mouth, not to apologize, but to salvage something, anything. Anne didn't give her the chance. "You may wear what befits your title," she said coldly, "but you will never wear what defined hers." And with that, she turned her back. Camilla didn't follow. She just stood there, watching the guard who had sealed her ambitions into locked crates walk slowly toward the door, legacy in hand. Rennick hoisted the first trunk into his arms, its weight substantial, not just from the velvet, silk and gold sealed inside, but from the history that clung to it. A lifetime of memories, a dynasty's worth of meaning, not currency, not symbolism, inheritance. Behind him, the remaining two trunks waited silently, bound in iron chain and labelled not with names but with lineage. William, Charlotte, George. Anne remained by the desk, unmoving. Camilla, silent now, watched with her arms wrapped around herself. Not defiant, just cornered, isolated. The room she once controlled now turned cold and indifferent, like the walls had chosen a side. As Rennick approached the door, Anne spoke once more. "Sergeant!" He paused. She walked toward him, only a step, enough to close the distance between guard and princess. Her expression wasn't softened, but it carried something deeper now. Restrained gratitude. Respect. "You've defended more tonight than walls," she said. "You've defended blood itself." He gave a short nod. "She would have done the same." Anne's throat moved slightly, but she said nothing else. She turned back toward the desk and placed the folded directive on top of the velvet tray, exactly where the rose diadem had once rested. Rennick continued down the corridor, 2 other guards silently joining him outside the door. No ceremony, no drums, no escorts, just 3 soldiers carrying the last unbroken pieces of a queen's promise. Behind them, the door to Camilla's office swung gently shut. Click. Inside, Anne didn't speak to Camilla again. She didn't offer a threat. She didn't need to. Her silence was the verdict. Camilla stood frozen near the fireplace, her attaché now withdrawn to a far corner of the room, pretending to study a folder that had long since been emptied of value. A moment later, the office dimmed slightly as the overhead lights reset, protocol triggered by the corridor alarms deactivating. Everything had returned to order, except the Queen Consort. She was still there, and everything she had tried to take was gone. Outside, the castle courtyard was blanketed in pale moonlight. Ivy rustled in the breeze. Rennick stepped into the open air, the final trunk in hand, its tamper seal glowing faint green under the security lights. The Royal Vault transport vehicle waited quietly along the gravel path, engine low, temperature already regulated inside the chamber. Rennick loaded the crates himself, one by one. When he closed the final door and keyed his biometric ID into the transfer panel, it chirped confirmation. Transfer logged, 2:17 a.m. Escort. Rennick, A destination. Heritage Class I Vault. Windsor. A pause, then the light blinked blue. Sealed. He stepped back and gave the driver a nod. The van rolled forward and disappeared through the gate, wheels crunching over stone like the closing of a chapter. And for the first time that night, Rennick exhaled. Not relief, not pride. Just the quiet knowing that some things were still safe. Should Princess Anne have the power to stop even the Queen Consort when inheritance is at risk? And was Sergeant Rennick right to break back in, even if it meant defying her directly? Tell us what you think in the comments below. We read every single one. If you believe the late Queen's inheritance should never be touched, never rewritten, and never stolen, smash that like button right now to show your support for legacy over greed. And don't forget, subscribe with notifications turned on so you never miss what really happens behind the Crown's most guarded doors. Share this video with someone who still believes duty must come before privilege. Because tonight's story proved that no matter how high the title, there are still lines you don't cross and legacies you don't touch. Another story is already waiting for you on screen right now. Click to watch the next one, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new video.